most important, I would say, constraint is the political will.
I
Mhm.
primarily grew up in the small Australian city, about 1 million in size, called Adelaide on the south coast in the state of South Australia. And we have a story of the impact of the American car industry coming to town after World War II. So basically, a GM plant or Chevrolet, but our version of Chevrolet was called Holden. Anyway,
Mhm.
so a Holden plant came to town in North Adelaide, and what immediately happened was ripping up the citywide tram, or what Americans call trolley system. And I know this because, as a good little geospatial analyst, I can go back and find the historical maps of the quite extensive trolley network across Adelaide. Now, let me tell you something very funny. So, in the past 20 years, the car industry, due to high labor costs in Adelaide, has collapsed. So the city lost a Mitsubishi engine factory, a Mitsubishi assembly plant, and the Chevrolet, for American audience, or the Holden assembly plant. What happened immediately after that? The tram system, or the trolley system, came back and the lines were being rebuilt on exactly the same corridors as they were before the car plants came to town.
You know what's you know what's fascinating is that story. It's not completely similar, but it's actually kind of reminds me of Los Angeles. So Los Angeles, California's Pacific Electric was massive. It was once the world's largest trolley system. And then General Motors came in, destroyed pretty much all of it,
I've
almost
heard of
all of
this.
it. Yep, destroyed pretty much all of it. But now, because of people being thankfully a little bit more aware, at least politicians, although definitely urban planners are a lot more aware of the damage of car dependency and how car-centric design is not going to be sustainable. They are thankfully trying to improve their transit. So that is a very fascinating story.
Okay, great. Well, that's some really useful introductory commentary, I think, Miles. So maybe I should introduce you properly. Welcome back to the Geospatial Index podcast. We are massively privileged to have Miles Kauffman, Master of City and Regional Planning student at Georgia Tech. In the City and Regional Planning program. Miles, you've proudly told me that this program is ranked 10 in the country. So yeah, we are privileged to have your expertise on this very important topic, high-speed rail for the US. So just briefly about the points we're going to step through. In the introductory comments, we've already laid the groundwork, I guess, or covered the important background of the political setting, which has enabled the current situation. We've also touched on YouTube being a source of inspiration for you with all the bullet trains. I think you're not alone there. So as we step through the rest of this episode, we'll be covering your response as an academic. So how you use geospatial to make a map, of course, and some commentary given your master's on transportation planning. So yeah, Miles, again, real privilege. Really looking forward to your points.
Definitely. So the city pair that I ultimately chose was Atlanta to Orlando, Florida. And Atlanta came down to a reason of me being based here, Ray Delhante's videos, as well as Atlanta being in the southern United States. Atlanta kind of is seen as like the most important city economic powerhouse of the South. So, or the Deep South, as we call it. And then Orlando was chosen because have when I was because based on research from the Bureau of Transportation Statistics data, Atlanta to Orlando is the single most popular short haul flight route in between the two cities, and it is one of the busiest short haul domestic flight routes not only in America but in the world. It is a very popular route.
That
Mo
sounds like, with another Australian reference here, the flight route between Sydney and Melbourne in Australia, which is often
yes.
the subject of conversation about high-speed rail as well. Yeah.
Yes, definitely. It's very similar. So Atlanta to Orlando is very popular between November of 24 and sorry, November 23, November 24, it was around 1.4 million passengers per in that entire year. And also, and the final reason from the and the final reason. So there's only two ways you get from Atlanta to Orlando. There's either you fly or you drive. And I-75, which is our main interstate freeway that goes south and goes into Florida, is horribly congested. Many people on an almost daily basis, it is going to be completely clogged with traffic, having walked over the freeway almost every other day because I have to go to Publix and go buy food, and the nearest one is literally in Midtown, but you have to cross the freeway.
So
So,
how many, because I remember, funnily enough, in the lead up to my family migrating, my wife spent a week doing some training here in Atlanta, and that was during the hurricanes Helene and Milton coming in. And there were a bunch of people from Tampa who drove up to seek safety in Atlanta who were staying in our
mhm.
hotel, and they said it took 11 hours to drive. So how far in miles is it, or kilometers to Orlando?
yeah,
To Orlando.
so yeah, so Atlanta to Orlando is approximately, at least for my route, it came down to around 746
Okay,
kilometers. So give or take the range of, I know it's not exact, but like 464 miles.
gotcha.
So it is definitely, so yeah, 11 hours totally makes sense. I would totally believe that it takes that amount of time. Even if you don't want to stop, or if you don't stop once, you're looking at a minimum drive time of 7, 8 hours.
Yeah.
And that's if you, again, that's if you really just do not stop or stop once for like maybe a bathroom break and are just, you know, that's with that's your absolute fastest, which of course, when people drive long distance, at least in my experiences, when my mom and dad drove in between here in Los Angeles, we would stop for lunch, stop for bathroom breaks, and that's just going to add to drive time.
Cool. Okay. So yeah, you were beginning to talk about your technology selection, I suppose, in your spatial analysis on how to get between these two cities.
Hmm.
So you said that you started out in Google Earth Engine.
Yes.
Do you have any spatial
The
data layers that you brought into Google Earth Engine? How was the experience using it? What caused the shift?
So I didn't specifically use any current data in Google Earth because Google Earth is more like kind of an advanced version of like is like advanced Google Maps. And if you like want to do some basic stuff in there, like if you want to draw a line, if you want to do pinpoints, then you go into Google Earth. So Google Earth was just for like the preliminary map. What happened then comes, this is where ArcGIS comes in, because that's where I definitely, because then I use the KML to layer conversion in ArcGIS.
Yep. Well
And
aware of
that
it.
that turns the rail line from just a file in Google Earth Pro to an actual shape file in ArcGIS Pro that you can now add to your into the map. So that's what I next did. And then I performed the measure tool because unfortunately there's a saying that we like to use called challenges and limitations. And unfortunately, there were many ways that I tried to measure the distance, but unfortunately did not really seem to work well. So I ended up having to use the measure tool, individually measure in between the station stops
Yep.
and calculate the total in between. And I also use that because I also wanted to calculate what is the average speed of the bullet train. Because one of the traps or pitfalls that you kind of can fall into is we often look at your top speed of a bullet train, but and while that's really good, and we do want to make sure that a bullet train can get up to top speed, it can get extremely fast for a large portion of the route, as much portion of the route as you can. But unfortunately, it cannot go at top speed for the whole time. It's going
Yeah.
to have to. Mhm,
Speaking of YouTube, this also reminds me of Lucid Stew, who's another uh, high-speed rail enthusiast on YouTube, and
mhm.
he also always talks about these calculations and how you should ignore, in fact, the top speed. You have to take into account, yeah, the time around bends, and the slowing down and speeding up around stations. Yeah. So could you tell us? So you've got the city pair, and now you started talking about stations. So yeah, give us a bit of a feel for where those stations are proposed to be, what the reasoning was behind those selections.
Hmm. So yes, of course. The the first station is 5 Point Station in Atlanta, and here's the reason why I did 5 points, even though Atlanta has an Amtrak, because Amtrak. What it comes down to is one, Atlanta's Amtrak station poorly poorly based. It is not in downtown. It is actually outside of downtown, sort of to the north, and it is not even connected to MARTA, which is our subway system. We have a pretty small one, but we do have a subway. So there's no transit connection to the Peachtree station, and also it is not within downtown. So by putting it in downtown at 5 points, and also what it comes down to is there are already existing train tracks underneath 5 points. As hard as that, even I initially didn't even know that until I looked on a Google Earth Pro, looked on a Google Maps, looked at the surrounding area, and found out that freight tracks do already go under 5 points. So
Wow.
yes, so yeah, it was pretty impressive. So
Freight
five
trains
points.
go underground under Atlanta?
So not like fully underground in the same way, like literal, like say an underground subway or like New York underground, but definitely in the downtown there are a number of underground tunnels
Yep.
because they don't want, yeah. So not like fully underground, but like underground tunnels, kind of sort of like making sure that they don't want to build a lot of railroad crossings in downtown,
Gotcha.
obviously. So yeah, it's
All right, so you can use that freight line you're saying to get the high-speed rail from Orlando to to downtown Atlanta. Awesome. Yep.
yes, from a pure academic standpoint, yes. So you use that freight line at 5 points, and it connects to all the four MARTA subways, and then the route's going to go south, and then I wanted to do I wanted to try to get an airport station. But unfortunately, this was a little bit of a constraint, but the airport MARTA station is above the ground. It's like way over to the west side of the airport. So getting an actual airport station didn't really work. What I ended up doing was connecting it was doing the East Point station, which
Yeah.
is the closest station to the airport that if you want to transfer from the bullet train to MARTA, you can do that. Unfortunately, because the problem is if I want to do an airport station, the only way I would really be able to do it would be it would have to go underground. Literally go be tunneled underground next to the MARTA station, and that's gonna unfortunately you're just adding a lot of money that if you can maybe do something a little bit more cost effective, then that's where I kind
Yeah.
of made a decision
It's
of
all
connect.
about these trade-offs. Yeah, so interesting too.
Yeah,
Yeah. I love that someone's already done all this thinking and work, and I actually can't wait to read your thesis. But yeah,
def
carry on. Yep.
definitely. Although it is just kind of an FYI, so it's not considered a thesis though. It is called the applied research paper, which is
Gotcha.
sort of the same thing as a thesis, but it's a little bit most people do the applied paper because you don't have to do as much for it. So it's like mini thesis if you
Okay.
kind of want to, yeah. But it's but I never but anyway, so
I hope you
after these
publish it somehow in some sort of urban planning journal, but yeah, maybe
I
I'll
do
leave you to.
want to.
Yeah.
I just need to figure out how to do that. Unfortunately, I've not looked into how to actually publish things, but I do want to publish it because believe it or not, I don't know if you know this, but the Beltline in Atlanta actually started with a thesis statement.
Oh,
So
I love the Beltline.
yeah,
Yeah.
yes, it's very nice. I hope we finish the train our light
Yes.
rail version of it sometime. But anyway, so yeah, it's so anyway, back to
Okay, so
the
I'll
bullet
keep
train. Mhm.
talking about tracks, or keep on the topic of tracks. So we're stepping through the stations, and we've gotten as far as an airport connection. Did you,
Mhm.
because Orlando Airport, did you also aim for one at the other end?
Yes. Yes, they have so Orlando finished its Brightline station. So, and upon looking on Google Earth, there is a train line where it can make a 180-degree turn from going south from downtown Orlando to the Brightline terminal. So the final stop of the bullet train is actually going to be the Brightline station.
I love this. So you're proposing essentially a high-speed rail network then from Miami to Atlanta.
Yes,
This is awesome.
pretty much. So the route then will so the route's then going to turn a little bit southeast and then essentially follow I-75 as much as it can. My proposal is largely going to be it's largely based on what Brightline West is doing with basically following I-15. Because I-75 it's not obviously straight as a bullet train, but it's mostly pretty straight with not a lot of curves. Excuse me. So it's going to mostly follow that route. The only exceptions are if it needs to diverge to go into a town. So the next town we're doing is Macon. Many people
Have
actually,
you got Google Maps open? Because it might be nice to share your screen, and there we go. There's the route.
yes, yep. Service area actually kind of ignore that. That didn't really, that unfortunately, one of the constraints and limitations I ran into was unfortunately the the service area layer that I tried to do an
Okay.
analysis of drive time didn't really work. But sure, let me go ahead and I'm gonna hide some of these just so you have a clear
Yeah.
example of what the train line looks like.
Yep.
So so here's the starting point. So this is
That's 5 points,
a
is it?
yes, this is 5 points. So if you go, it's very hard to see, but if you go right
I
here,
see.
there's a little freight line right into 5 points. So right about there. So that's essentially where the beginning is. And then if we follow, so what it's going to do is while it's in Atlanta, it's going to follow these freight tracks. It's going to follow these freight tracks until East Point because that's the closest station to the
Gotcha.
airport. So right about here, there will be a station. It'll connect to the MARTA, or maybe might even be maybe closer to here. I haven't really decided, but that's for honestly later analysis. But so right around here is East Point, the airport transfer. Then it's going to keep following the freight tracks until right around here, it's going to make a bit of a sharp turn, possibly. I should might need to make that a little bit more wide, but it's not going to go very fast. Obviously, when in Atlanta, it's going to be more like when it's within the city limits. It's not going to be more than like 40 miles an hour, 70 kilometers an hour ish, because obviously it's within a city limit. You don't want. I mean, no, you don't really
Yeah,
want.
this does bring
Yeah.
up the issue, an important issue in terms of high-speed rail or achieving high
Mm-hmm.
speeds, which is a minimum turn radius.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, in my explorations, in terms of algorithmically defining a route in a constraints analysis, uh, it seems like the algorithm would need to respect a minimum turn radius, or a
Mm-hmm.
trajectory. There should be limits on the trajectory from cell to cell. Anyway, so yeah, just to flag this as an example of that issue. Yep. All right. Cool.
No, yeah, definitely. No, yeah, definitely. Unfortunately unfortunately that being more, unfortunately, I don't know if ArcGIS has that ability, or if it has, I was not actually taught that.
It's all good. I haven't been able to
Yeah,
find an existing algorithm either, but I'm sure one exists.
yeah,
And I've
yeah.
even gone as far because there's a influential guy in terms of geospatial technology on LinkedIn, especially, called Sheng Wu, who's
Mm-hmm.
Chinese, but he's a professor at a US university, I think in Tennessee. Anyway,
Mm,
so
nice.
I've actually I contacted him this morning to see if he's able to use his network back in China, to find out about spatial analysis to define the massive 30,000 kilometer long high-speed rail network in China, and whether there's an algorithm to factor in things like minimum turn radii. Anyway, that's another aside. Back to your
Yeah.
presentation.
Yeah, so the route continues following I-75. This is where I did try to take more into consideration turn radius and making sure that it wasn't super sharp. I think for the most part I kept it gradual until this is where, so our first stop is Macon. So what it's going to do is it's going to follow these freight tracks and slow down and kind of just go along the river and these freight tracks all the way to Macon, which right here is about downtown Macon. A lot of people actually super commute from Macon to Atlanta because, well, I've been told Macon doesn't have the best economic opportunities, and a lot of people prefer Atlanta over Macon, but also because Atlanta is so expensive to live, they rather than rather than live in Atlanta, they super commute, which honestly it's kind of sad actually, you know.
How long is that, or how far?
So the distance we make in Atlanta, I've not measured that distance in a while, but let me pull up the stations. I should be able to get. Let me just pull up the station to actually attribute table. And that will be able to. Okay, so yeah, it's about 85 miles away.
Okay.
So yeah, so that's our.
That is a
So yeah.
commute. That's definitely a super commute. Yep.
Oh, it would be it is a pretty big super commute. I've heard people do them. I mean, I've heard of a story of like I know like there was a nurse who like lives in Stockton and she would commute every day to like San Jose and like
Right.
that's like yeah, that's like a 3-hour super commute
Damn.
on transit. So now here and then so the next station after is Valdosta. And the reason I chose Valdosta along with my advisor. So another thing about the research paper is you have an advisor, and every week, at least for me, is I would meet with her and we would discuss updates on the project, as well as in this particular situation, we would discuss what other stations in Georgia should we include in addition to just Atlanta to Orlando. Atlanta. And that's where Valdosta came up because
Gotcha.
Valdosta is a college town. It has a college around here. I believe it's called Valdosta State College. I've unfortunately not been to Valdosta at all, so I unfortunately am not too familiar with the with the college there. But they do have a college, so the route would follow existing freight tracks into Valdosta, and we would make sure to put the station around here. I mean, it doesn't need to be. Keep in mind, these are not like the final stops. Like we can, in a future like analysis, I would be able to. We could definitely like change this. Like if it had to go here, we could put it there, or if we wanted to put it like maybe up there, closer to college. This is just kind of more of a general sort of kind of what city are we looking at and what route are we actually going to follow? Because
Could
you
you
know,
zoom out a bit to show from
sure,
Atlanta to Valdosta, just for context, for
sure.
foreigners like me? Okay, cool. I see. So I also wanted. So you mentioned Macon. That has been mentioned in various studies, really.
Mm-hmm.
Because I went on the what's it called, Corridor ID program, which was introduced during Biden's administration. And on the website there's a whole bunch of studies going back to the 1960s, really when Japan created the Shinkansen. That prompted the Americans to start thinking about high-speed rail too. So since the 1960s, there have been, sort of an update every 5 years or 10 years of proposed stations, and Macon was one of them, has been in various papers and studies. So it's
Yeah.
interesting you're including it as well.
Yep. Macon was, in fact, another reason I chose Macon was in a previous report, there was a study done of a bullet train from Atlanta to Jacksonville, and then it would later go to Orlando, though unlike my route, which goes more west and then to Valdosta and then until turns a little bit east to Gainesville, their route, this isn't exact, but their route more continues going to the east and goes to like I think Savannah's kind of around
Hmm.
here. Unfortunately, I don't have Savannah listed, but it would more go to the east and follow the coast and then go to Jacksonville
Hmm.
and then turn west to Orlando. So yeah, that was another reason I chose Macon because they in a previous study there was they listed Macon and yeah, that was another reason why I chose Macon as well. So so out back to Valdosta, we continue south across the border, and then here we
So,
have
so you're
Waldo
still
Gate.
on,
Mhm.
yeah. So you're on to Gainesville, but to get from Valdosta to Gainesville, you said you're on freight rail corridor.
Um, not not quite.
Okay.
Not until really around it. Not until like around here. Yeah, not
Okay.
until here, and then it follows a brief freight corridor, which this is the Waldo Gainesville Amtrak stop. So unfortunately, trying to get it into Gainesville was very hard because Gainesville, like all the way over here, and it's very hard to like build a bullet train station there because there's like it's gotten like sprawled out businesses, and I couldn't really find a good place to build it. So I settled on Waldo because there's a throughway bus that connects to an Amtrak station at Waldo, and I figured maybe that would just be the better option because Gainesville, for one thing, is not a large city. It's a smaller city town, although it does have the important University of Florida. So that's kind of why I initially chose Waldo Gainesville as opposed to like actually Gainesville because it was very hard to like figure out like where to actually put a stop in Gainesville. Like you kind of notice like I had a lot of difficulty like trying to find like where to put a stop here.
Yeah, yeah. No, these. I think we raised the subject of trade-offs already, and yeah, you're right into
Yeah.
the
So
weeds on constraints analysis there. Yeah.
So now the route's going to then travel is going to travel east, and then this is where it will fall freight tracks. So what it's going to do is it's going to connect to these. Oh, where is it? Right here. So right here are these existing are these abandoned freight tracks. I actually don't
Yeah.
think I think they're abandoned. So these freight tracks will essentially make up the rest of the route. So what it's going to do is it's going to just basically follow these freight tracks all the way all the way until around here. And then it's going to unfortunately have to go back to dedicated trackage and it's going to have to go over some these rivers. And the reason it's up here is because these bridges would be a lot smaller than say if it were like if it's like here. Like you can like these are very narrow segments of the river. I actually do not know the name of this river, unfortunately. Apologies, these segment but these bridge segments would be very small compared to like like here. Like
Yeah.
that would be a much bigger one. Yeah. So then it goes to dedicated existing sorry, not dedicated, existing freight tracks. So
Hmm.
now it's gonna essentially follow the existing freight tracks all the way through exurban Orlando and then suburban Orlando, go all the way, and then this is still suburban Orlando.
Was there
I
an
did it for
existing bridge there? Because you there was a river crossing just there, yeah, next to that lake. So you're
yeah,
choosing. Okay, so
yeah.
there's a
There's an
bridge there.
existing bridge. Yeah,
Cool.
yeah. So though they probably will have to build a new one because it's I believe it because it is only like a single track line and the bridge is an older design. It's
Okay.
like it's an older kind of 18 early 1900s era arch bridge, but
Okay.
yeah. So
It'll
it will probably
explode on
have
the
to be.
first pass of this high bullet train.
Yeah. So they'll probably have to build a new one, but I digress. So now we're in suburban Orlando, so it's going to keep following these freight tracks and follow, I believe, the Sun Rail as well. Yeah, it's going to follow the Sun Rail, which is Orlando's commuter train, opened less than a decade ago. It's been open for yeah, it opened less than a decade ago. So very new. And then finally it starts. So this is the downtown Orlando station. This is the connection to the buses. So the Orlando bus transit and the commuter train. Now they do have an Amtrak, but for some reason the Amtrak is like it's like down here, which is weird. And that part really got me perplexed. And initially I was debating, well, do I put it at the Amtrak or do I put it at the bus station and the Sunrail station? And I felt it's better, but I realized it's better put it at the local bus and Sunrail station because that's Orlando Transit, and more
Yeah.
likely than not, you're going to transfer to, yeah, you're going to transfer
There's
to,
more ridership
yeah, local buses
or more
and
trips.
local,
Yeah.
yeah, you're going to transfer to local stuff, not Amtrak. So now the route's going to continue moving south along dedicated freight tracks still. So, you know, it's going to keep moving. It's going to keep traveling south along the freight tracks all the way until here. So right around here, there's a there's a turn, a junction that turns 90 degrees east. So that junction goes all the way here, and there's a little Brightline maintenance facility, I believe. I think. I'm not really actually sure if that's a maintenance facility. I think it is. But it's going to keep following these Brightline tracks all the way, going to make another 90-degree turn, and then it's going to stop right there
Ah,
at
there we go. So
Orlando's
that's the
Brightline.
terminus. Cool.
Mm-hmm.
So Brightline goes south from there because
Yes.
that's the airport.
Yep.
And where does
Right.
Brightline go?
So Brightline goes to Miami. So Brightline's going to go. So Brightline goes south, and
Down
it's
there. Okay.
gonna, yeah, and it's gonna. I don't know exactly where, but eventually somewhere near Cocoa, it's gonna this is not the route, but I'm gonna just kind of show you like the general
Yeah.
route. It goes like this, goes to Cocoa, and then keeps following the coastline, Miami, West Palm Beach, all the way down to Miami Central. Yeah.
Okay, so what I really liked, could you zoom out again so we can see from start to
Mhm.
finish the alignment?
Sure. Yeah. In fact, let me go ahead. I'll do this. Let me go ahead and do a zoom to layer so you can
There we
see the
go.
whole thing. There you go.
Excellent. Perfect. You're a skilled geospatial technician there, Miles. All right, so that's a really amazing overview. So some of the videos from Lucid Stew are about this provocative idea of, and a political idea actually, of
Mhm.
repurposing interstate corridors for high-speed rail.
Mhm.
And, there's this classic thing, especially in Hollywood movies for foreigners, right? I'm continuing my role as a foreigner here. Something that blows foreigners' minds about America is these effectively, 10, 15 lane highways, if you're talking about both directions.
Mhm.
And that if you just stole two of those lanes and put a bullet train down the middle of the interstate corridor, it would transform transit or transport for people using that interstate. So do you know roughly what proportion of this proposed alignment uses interstate corridors?
Well, I couldn't give you an exact percentage amount, but I can tell you that at the very least until Macon, it's going to use the 75,
Yeah.
and then, oops, and then it, and then it will continue using the 75 until Valdosta, and I think, I think it go, and then, let me see, let me just. I think it until at least Valdosta. So
Yeah.
it'll use I-75 until at least Valdosta. It might even use, and then I think I made it a little bit beyond Valdosta. Although the thing with 75 is at some point, I think because I believe it goes to Tampa. So at some point you do have to diverge, because the problem is because I-75 I believe goes to Tampa, it's gonna keep going southwest, whereas we need to obviously go east. So
Okay.
up
And as
until
I
I would say,
understand,
yeah.
Brightline, there are plans to extend Brightline from Orlando to Tampa, as I understand it. But I can understand that Orlando maybe is a more significant connection.
Yes.
So have you looked at how the is there enough room in the I-75 corridor to put a high-speed rail on the side, or would you literally propose to cut up some of the road and put the bullet train literally down the middle, like they're doing with Brightline West going from LA to Vegas?
I was proposing it more down the middle, but
Yeah.
I wouldn't be if it was on the side, I wouldn't be against it, because I know like not every interstate is the same. Some interstates you might not really be able to do that. Some interstates you can definitely do that. and just because it works with I-15 doesn't mean it works with I-70 down the middle on I-15 doesn't mean it works down the middle on I-75. I couldn't give you a definitive answer on like I can't really say which is better because that analysis is a little bit that would require some more comprehensive analysis and
Yeah, no problem.
unfortunately yeah that
You're at
requires
the
a little bit more
feasibility stage.
comprehensive.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's a more comprehensive analysis. But I will say, if they wanted to build it alongside I-75 on one of the sides, as opposed to down the middle, I would not be against that. That would
Yeah.
be fine by me. I'm good with either. I more or less kind of I just did it in the middle, kind of because I was using Brightline West as a model.
Yeah.
So yeah, I was just using
If
Brightline
I can
West as a
say, there's
model.
I mentioned the political dimensions of this, but like as a sign of dominance, wouldn't it be great
Hmm.
that a high-speed rail system, I think necessarily needs to reclaim land from a
Oh, it
deficient
does.
transport system. So yeah, to take back a couple of lanes of an interstate, I think is necessary. Okay, so
Definitely.
in I guess just to cover off the final point then. Have
Hmm.
you got any topics to discuss about transport planning, or how a transport planner might respond to this proposal you've put together in this uh, information system about geospatial, about geography called ArcGIS Pro?
Yeah, I will say it will kind of depend on who I'm talking to. I've talked to some planners that would be very much in favor of this, but there will definitely be planners that will definitely question this idea and they will, bring up how realistic even is it because of the political atmosphere, frankly, of both states. They will so it could vary. I've not specifically talked to any planner yet, other than my advisor, who actually she's only a part-time lecturer and actually does work with a couple of Georgia transportation agencies. But other than her, I've not really sat down with a bunch of transportation planners and have really discussed like how they would feel about it. So I will say probably it would range from some would probably be in favor of it and would be very excited for it, to others might be a little bit more cautious, not
Hmm.
might not be as enthusiastic because they're gonna factor into account, again, the politics are gonna factor into account cost. They're gonna, you know, and the problem is, and they're gonna also take into account state laws. And unfortunately, it's in Arizona, and I believe it's in Georgia as well. State laws literally do not permit funding of state funding of transit. So Atlanta's transit funding is purely from the city. It cannot get funding
Wow.
from
Why does
Georgia.
that law
Yeah,
exist?
that law exists because the car lobby.
How incredible. I have heard of this. Okay, so it's interesting to hear you confirm this. So, wow.
It's the
It's
same thing in
important,
Arizona too, by the way. It's
right?
literally the same thing in Arizona. And that law I do know much better, and I know when it was written. So Arizona law, which does not permit rail or transit funding by the state government, was written in 1970 in the state constitution. Now that's an Arizona law, but my point being, it was written in 1970. So yeah, not a coincidence. It was written in that time
Because why? Why is it not a coincidence?
because that was when we were because that was when we were so many of our transit systems at the time were already being torn up. It was in Phoenix had already finished it. Phoenix's extensive trolley system had been completely torn up by 1948, or at least it was closed and torn up pretty much in like 10 years. So car so the car com so the car lobby's blessing, basically the Arizona state government passes Article 9, Section 14 of the Constitution, which says the funding of transit. Sorry, let me rephrase that. The state cannot fund transit or rail in any capacity. State government cannot fund transit or rail. It can only fund roads. And
So, okay, again, playing the role of an idiot foreigner here. Although,
yeah,
so what you said about, was it LA's trolley system was torn up in 1948? Did you say which city?
no, that was Phoenix's,
Phoenix. Okay,
because that was
which is
where
around the
that
same.
was the yeah.
That's around the
Sorry.
same time as it was done, probably within a decade. Of what happened in
Yes.
Adelaide. So there's a risk here of being naive, and that you have
Hmm.
spent all this time on this wonderful proposed alignment. You've made sensible choices about using existing corridors for where cuttings have already been made through mountain passes, etc.
Mm.
So you're being efficient um, in terms of capital outlays for constructing this route. We're all very enthusiastic about it, but it would be naive, it seems, to invest any more time and effort in this without addressing the obvious roadblocks, uh, pun intended, put in place by the car lobby, as you're saying, for even
Hmm.
messing with state constitutions,
Yeah.
stopping the funding of this kind of transport. So I have, as the idiot foreigner here, the observation that a nice blunt weapon to wield in response to this cynical perversion of state constitutions is how many lives are lost every year on the interstate driving between Orlando and Atlanta. Do you know that?
So I unfortunately don't know how many people specifically are killed on I-75 between every year. I only know that 30,000 Americans every year die in car crashes.
There we go. So that's a great starting point to stigmatize the interstate highway system as being the single mode of transport. No one would want to advance the view that it must be removed entirely, but
Hmm.
to entirely rely upon it such that you get 30,000 deaths a year. I think that's a great, that kind of a contrast in terms of lives saved with the investment it would take. It'll be of the order of billions, I imagine, to build this high-speed rail route. Um,
Hmm.
I think you you need to start to use those sort of heavy weapons in terms of changing mindset. So yeah, we're firmly outside the realms of geospatial here, but it's naive
Hmm.
not to discuss this topic um, regardless or nevertheless.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I will say that the other weapon that I would have, not as effective as the, the number of Americans who die every year in car crashes, but I also believe that, and having watched a Not Just Bikes video which talked about Dutch roads,
I love
the
that
people,
channel.
yeah, so do I love him as well. He's amazing at what he does and his analysis of city planning and all that stuff. He mentions one of the things that I would say even many drivers fail to really understand is that when you have more options than just driving, than just an interstate, the driver actually benefits. A person driving a car benefits when there actually is more options, because
Because there'll be
if
less
that per
congestion.
yes, exactly, because that means there will be less congestion, and that means they who want to drive can get to where they want to go faster. And it's the reason why the Netherlands not only has the best bike lanes, arguably on the planet, but also have some of the best roads and some of the best freeways and some of the probably and arguably safest roads and freeways on the planet, because more options benefits the driver just
I
as
love
much
this.
as it would benefit.
Speaking of perversions, that is just a great way to approach it. Like that will confuse the opposition because they're like, "Hang on, you guys are trying to help us. I'm not used to that. I won't know what to say." That's a great point to make. Okay,
Hmm.
so cool. We've covered off the politics. We've covered off a spatial analysis. We started to talk
Hmm.
about transport planning implications of this proposed design. You've promoted your faculty. And yeah, we've seen, I guess, in this discussion, the kind of thinking that your master's program produces, Miles. And we're talking then about the future of this population, and you embodying the approach to how to improve America as a result of what you're studying. So I think, yeah, this has been a productive first foray for the podcast into high speed rail, and it's really it's a source of hope for me to see the kind of dedication to this topic in you, Miles.
Definitely. Yes. Thank you. Thank you very much for having me on.